As I've said before, in my opinion, and of course I could be wrong, but it's not likely, the entirety of BRICS, you can talk about any leader of any BRICS country, and they're all speaking from one script. It doesn't matter which leader you're talking about. Everyone's got the same script, and they all have their roles to play in that script. So when they took the case to the ICJ, the immediate objective was to get some emergency measures. But at the same time, they were seeking that with the knowledge that it would be shot down by the United States. And that's anticipated. And I think it's counted upon that the United States will veto it. When they craft these resolutions, they craft the language very carefully. So when, for example, earlier, when Russia proposed a ceasefire, the language was worded very carefully, knowing that there's no way that the US would go along with it. And the same with the one that was proposed by, I think it was the UAE. It's like you're proposing it knowing it's going to be shot down, because the shooting down of the ceasefire is the whole point. Because we're making a point about the United States, and we're making a point about how dysfunctional the United Nations is. Because the ultimate goal here is to take the peace process out of the United Nations and out of the hands of the United States. So I think that that's all part of what they're trying to achieve, because everyone knows, just a very justified impression that the United States, the United Nations can't be salvaged, that it's permanently under the thumb of the United States, and so you have to, because this is like if you're talking about dissolving the United Nations, that's massive. That's a massive thing to ask for. And actually what we're asking for is much less than that. But the impression that people have of it is that it's even more radical than calling for the dissolution of the United Nations, which just shows you the mindset and the way that most people think, that dissolving the United Nations is an easier thing to do than getting the United States out of the United Nations. This is moving alongside, along with the already existing momentum of what BRICS is doing, and what, like, for example, China and Russia, and who else now? I think Saudi Arabia as well have advocated for an international peace conference, basically taking, and I've talked about this many times, taking the peace process out of the United Nations and out of the West in general, out of the hands of the United States. So this is all moving together. It's all part of the same momentum to expose, like I said, the lack of integrity and the lack of independence and the lack of sovereignty even of all of the members of the United Nations. So if we, for example, really push this call and then it gets shot down, and they come up with some sort of bureaucratic protocol type reasons why, well, no, actually it's impossible to get the US out. Then it advances the call for, well, what's the point of the United Nations then? We need a separate organization. We need a different organization, because this just doesn't work. It's completely rigged, and we're just we're pursuing the exposure of that fact to the point of undeniability, that is just seen by all, that the United Nations is broken and can't be fixed because it was made broken from the beginning when it was created. It was always created as a colonialist institution. We're more or less pretending that it cannot be a colonialist institution. And if it can prove that it can reform and change, then great, alhamdulillah. But the likelihood is that it can't. The likelihood is that it will remain what it always was, because that's in its DNA. That's what it was designed to be. And its system is already designed to ensure that the United States will always remain the ultimate top boss at the United Nations. So if we completely expose that by proving that it's impossible to dislodge American hegemony over the United Nations, then that just advances the call for either complete reform and restructuring of the UN or the establishment of a new organization. That this is a strategic tactic for essentially calling into question the integrity of the United Nations, and in fact the usefulness and even the potential of the United Nations to ever be uh, impartial and to ever actually properly represent the global consensus. It's a radical goal just because no one's ever talked about it before, but you can't really say it's radical because it's referring to a process that's in the United Nations Charter. We're not talking about doing anything outside of the system. We're not talking about doing anything or calling for anything that's outside of institutional protocol. So there shouldn't actually be any room for regarding it as destructive in any way. We're calling for existing protocols in the charter of the institution to be activated. That's all. And this is why I think it's also important. It's important whether we actually believe in the United Nations or not. We're not calling for the dissolution of the United Nations. We're not saying some fiery rhetoric against the United Nations. We're saying that we believe in the institution and we want it to work properly. And that includes actually utilizing the mechanisms that are in the Charter of the United Nations to ensure that everyone who's in the United Nations abides by the Charter. We're just saying, be true to what you wrote down, what you put in the contract. Just keep up the terms of the contract. That's all we're saying.